The air in the grand ballroom of the Obsidian Heights Hotel was thick with the scent of lilies and the sharp, metallic tang of expensive champagne. It was the kind of atmosphere that felt designed to stifle anyone who didn't belong to the upper echelons of the city's corporate elite. Elena Vance stood near a marble pillar, her hand gripping the stem of a glass she had no intention of drinking from. She was the centerpiece of the evening, or so she had been told. Across the room, Julian Thorne, the charismatic and silver-tongued CEO of Thorne Global Logistics, stood on a small, raised platform. He cleared his throat, and the room fell into a respectful, hungry hush. When Julian began to speak, his voice was smooth, like expensive bourbon. He announced their new professional partnership with a flourish, calling Elena his diamond in the rough from the northern coast. But the moment the words left his mouth, a wave of snickering rippled through the room. It started in the back, where the junior executive stood, and cascaded forward until even the board members were smiling behind their hands. One woman, draped in diamonds that cost more than Elena's childhood home, whispered loudly enough for the entire front row to hear. "A girl from the fishing docks playing at high-stakes logistics? I suppose Julian needed a new mascot." Julian didn't defend her. Instead, he let out a short, condescending chuckle, a signal to the room that Elena was a curiosity, a charity case, or perhaps just a clever PR move, but certainly not a peer. The public ridicule was sharp and calculated, intended to remind Elena exactly where she stood in their hierarchy. She remained perfectly still, her face a mask of professional neutrality, but inside, a cold, hard resolve began to crystallize. They thought her silence was submission. They didn't realize it was observation. They didn't understand the world that had forged her. Elena had been raised in Oak Haven Harbor, a place where the Atlantic Ocean wasn't a scenic backdrop, but a volatile neighbor. It was a town of salt-cracked hands and boots that were never truly dry. Her father had been a master of maritime logistics long before the term became a corporate buzzword, managing the complex schedules of 100 independent fishing boats with nothing but a ledger and a keen sense of the tides. Elena had grown up in the engine rooms and on the cold, foggy docks, learning that resilience wasn't about being the loudest person in the room. It was about being the one who survived the storm. She had worked her way through university by managing the accounts of 3 local shipping firms, turning their archaic systems into lean, profitable machines. She knew the value of a dollar and the weight of a promise, concepts that seemed entirely foreign to the people currently laughing at her in the ballroom. Her roots in Oak Haven had given her a perspective they lacked, a groundedness that allowed her to see through the glitz and recognize the structural rot beneath the surface of Thorne Global Logistics. The partnership with Julian Thorne had initially seemed like the opportunity of a lifetime. Julian had approached her with talk of bridging the gap between traditional industry and the digital future. He had praised her analytical mind and her ability to spot inefficiencies that his own Ivy League consultants had missed. For a few months, Elena believed she was building something meaningful. She spent 18 hours a day restructuring Thorne's chaotic supply chains, identifying millions of dollars in waste, and streamlining their international shipping routes. However, the reality of the partnership soon became clear. Julian didn't want a partner. He wanted a scapegoat. He needed someone with a salt-of-the-earth reputation to front the company while he and his inner circle played dangerous games with the books. He treated her like a secret weapon he was ashamed to admit he needed, excluding her from the real board meetings while using her data to secure massive investments. The heart of the company's darkness, however, wasn't Julian. It was Evelyn Blackwood, the chief operating officer. Evelyn was a woman who moved through the office like a cold front, leaving a trail of bruised egos and broken careers in her wake. She was the architect of the firm's toxic culture, a system built on fear, surveillance, and the systematic silencing of dissent. Under Evelyn's watch, HR was not a resource for employees, but a weapon used to intimidate anyone who dared to question the executive suite's creative accounting. Elena watched as young, talented analysts were worked to the point of collapse, only to be discarded the moment they stopped being useful. Evelyn took a particular interest in Elena, seeing her as a threat to be neutralized. She would frequently undermine Elena's instructions to her staff, mock her accent in front of clients, and ensure that Elena was left off critical email chains. It was a calculated campaign of psychological warfare designed to make Elena quit. But Evelyn had made a fatal mistake. She assumed Elena was soft because she was quiet. Elena began her counteroffensive in the quiet hours between midnight and 4 in the morning. She didn't use her company-issued laptop, which she knew was being monitored by Evelyn's IT goons. Instead, she used a custom-built, air-gapped machine in her small apartment. She didn't start with the big crimes, she started with the small ones. She documented every instance of verbal abuse she witnessed, every time a junior employee was forced to sign a non-disclosure agreement under duress, and every time Evelyn used company funds for personal extravagances. But as she dug deeper, she found something far more explosive. Tucked away in a series of ghost servers was a ledger she dubbed the Blackwood File. It contained detailed records of kickbacks from international port authorities and a sophisticated scheme to bypass environmental regulations in the North Atlantic. Julian and Evelyn weren't just being mean, they were committing systematic fraud on a global scale. Elena spent weeks cross-referencing shipping manifests with bank transfers, building a digital map of their corruption that was as undeniable as it was devastating. The timing of the final strike had to be perfect. Elena waited for the day of the company's initial public offering, the moment Julian and Evelyn expected to become billionaires. The morning was a frenzy of activity, with the news cameras lined up outside the stock exchange and the firm's executives wearing their most expensive suits. While Julian was giving a live interview to a major financial network, Elena was in her office, her finger hovering over the send key. She didn't just send the files to the regulatory authorities. She sent them to every major shareholder, every employee in the company, and the very news networks Julian was currently courting. The release was a masterpiece of logistical precision. By the time Julian finished his interview and checked his phone, the stock price had already begun a vertical drop. The documents were so clear, the evidence so overwhelming, that there was no room for spin. The fallout was swifter than anyone expected. Within hours, federal agents were at the Thorne Global headquarters, seizing servers and files. Julian Thorne's Golden Boy image evaporated instantly as footage of his panicked exit from the stock exchange went viral. Evelyn Blackwood attempted to flee, but her own trail of digital breadcrumbs led investigators straight to her. The company didn't just fail, it imploded. For the employees who had suffered under their reign, the revelation was a moment of liberation. Elena, however, was nowhere to be found when the sirens arrived. She had already packed her belongings and left the office for the last time. She didn't want the spotlight. She didn't want to be the new CEO. She had done what she came to do. She had dismantled a machine of corruption and cleared the way for something honest to take its place. In the weeks that followed, the news cycle moved on to the next scandal, but the impact of Elena's actions remained. The dock girl they had laughed at had become the architect of their downfall. Elena returned to Oak Haven Harbor, where the air was clean and the people meant what they said. She used her portion of the partnership's remaining legal settlements to establish a cooperative that helped local fisheries modernize their logistics, ensuring that the wealth of the ocean stayed in the hands of those who worked it. She sat on the porch of her new home, looking out at the Atlantic, the same ocean that had taught her how to survive the storm. There was no grand ceremony, no public accolades, and no more mocking laughter. There was only the quiet, steady rhythm of the tide, a victory that was silent, strategic, and entirely her own.